Edward B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, October 24th, 2019. Republicans have orchestrated stunts to disrupt the impeachment hearings, the investigations and interviews that are underway. And at a White House dinner the other night, Donald Trump pressed them for these kinds of actions and gave them his approval. Before we dive into the Washington scene, a quick update here from wildfire country in California. Yesterday, Pacific Gas and Electric Company shut down power in about 15 counties here in Northern California, and that was to prevent fires from breaking out because of the conditions. We have high winds, extremely low humidity, and a heat wave here in our typical Indian summer. It's over 95 degrees outside, and your humble host is in shorts and a T-shirt today. But in Sonoma County, there is a fire that has been tagged the Kincaid Fire. Broke out about 9:30 last night, and that is in an area where the power had been shut down at 3 p.m. So PG&E can exclude itself as a suspect in this particular fire, at least on the face of it. But it started with about 300 acres, and overnight it expanded to now what is 10,000 acres or more. 2,000 people have been evacuated, and we are told that forecasts indicate that the strongest wind event of the season is likely to occur this weekend. And that means that more power outages are likely to be imposed. So you can tell my power's not off, or you wouldn't be hearing a podcast today. I feel fortunate, but we remain to see what happens this weekend. Back to the Beltway and the orchestrated Republican efforts to distract the public from the impeachment investigation that's underway. The silly stunts that the Republicans are enacting come from the juvenile brain of the tweeter-in-chief, our dear tweeter. So we know now that there was a White House dinner where Trump complained that the boys on the Hill, and they are all boys, who showed up to disrupt the interview of a Defense Department official, that he told those boys that they don't have his back. They're not doing enough to protect him. And so Neanderthals like Matt Gaetz of Florida, Jim Jordan of Ohio, and Steve Scalise, the minority leader in the House, they led the charge to the basement of the Capitol, and they staged this stunt. They claim that they are locked out of the proceedings. More than half of the Republicans who staged this silly stunt are members of the committees and are participating, if they wish, in the interviews, depositions, whatever you want to call the inquiry and its treatment, its handling of these witnesses who are parading over to Capitol Hill. But pandering to his base on Twitter, Matt Gaetz says, I led over 30 of my colleagues into the SCIF, where Adam Schiff is holding secret impeachment depositions. Still inside. More details to come. So the conspiracy of all of this drama is concocted and obvious. And that probably isn't detectable to millions of Republicans and Trump followers who are predisposed to believe that he is a victim here. So in the voice of the Washington Post, the lawmakers staged the dramatic protest while making process arguments that sidestep the substance of the central allegations underpinning the inquiry. Democrats accused the protesting members of compromising security by taking their phones into the secured area where cell phones are banned. But none of the 13 Republicans who spoke defended Trump on the merits of the investigation or the materials that have been made public so far. Now, they do have a legitimate gripe that some things are being leaked and some of the interviewees are feeding the media by providing them with opening statements. And if I were a Republican, I'd feel that that is not fair. But get this. Trump has finally figured out a line of attack on Bill Taylor, who seems to be an unimpeachable, and that is an intentional pun, witness of his perfidy. Yesterday, all he could say was, how can you have a quid pro quo when there's no quo? And if you believe the New York Times, they took care of that by showing that Zelensky in Ukraine knew about the withholding of the military aid as early as the 1st of August. And that's a game that Trump has been playing. But here is his attack on Taylor. This is a tweet, it would be really great if the people within the Trump administration, all well-meaning and good, parentheses, I hope, exclamation point, close parentheses, could stop hiring never-Trumpers who are worse than the do-nothing Democrats. Nothing good will ever come from them. What? So Trump is a victim here of people in his own White House who promoted Bill Taylor to replace Yovanovitch, the female ambassador that Trump yanked because she wasn't playing ball on the Ukraine squeeze. This is just so over the top. Trump is a victim of his own White House. They're all well-meaning and good, but they hired a never-Trumper. Certainly. Not his fault. You can't blame Trump. So, it is important to note that the process arguments that the Republicans are raising are empty. And let me quote Judge Andrew Napolitano, a fixture on Fox News, a darling of the right wing, a guy who he has judicial background and he makes a lot of extreme statements. So he went on Foxy Friends, the president's favorite show, and Napolitano said that while he understands House Republicans are frustrated, their critiques are off the mark because Democrats are simply following rules that were enacted by the Republican majority, the Boehner majority, in 2015. I read the House rules, Napolitano said, and as frustrating as it may be to those hearings going on behind closed doors, the hearings over which Congressman Schiff is presiding, they are consistent with the rules. And Brian Kilmeade, a reliable Trump toady, interjected, saying Democrats can make up any rules they want. And Napolitano pushed back. Well, they can't change the rules. They follow the rules. They were enacted by the Republican House majority in January of 2015. Here's a quote from Napolitano. The rules say that this level of inquiry, initial level, can be done in secret. Secret evidence doesn't work in this world, so eventually there will be a public presentation of this at which lawyers for the president can cross-examine these people and challenge them. So it's a totally contrived controversy. But it will dupe even people who probably watched Napolitano on Foxy Friends. Now we have tweets of Trump praising the House Republicans for storming that room yesterday. And then we get Trump's patsy, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. Now, it was just the other day he was criticizing Trump for calling impeachment a lynching. He's been a blistering critic of Trump's withdrawal from Syria. But maybe we should rename Lindsey Patsy because he is now launching a resolution in the Senate denouncing impeachment and claiming that it's inappropriate and Trump's innocent and all that kind of stuff. The gamesmanship really knows no bottom, so hang on to what you got there. And here's a column by the New York Times, byline Michael D. Shear and Nicholas Fandos. Senate Republicans plan to introduce this resolution. Lindsey Graham has fiercely defended the president. This is un-American at its core, he told Sean Hannity, the impartial Sean Hannity. What the House of Representatives is doing is a process of political revenge. It is alien to American due process. And all you have to do is trot out all of Lindsey Graham's quotes about Bill Clinton's impeachment from 98 and 99, and you'll see just what a fucking hypocrite he is. Pardon my language, but it's appropriate in this case. Now, we are learning today that the impeachment investigators have negotiated with a lawyer for John Bolton, about a date for him to answer questions behind closed doors. Now, that one can be very interesting because I think Bolton has a strong self-preservation instinct. And now that he's been dumped by Trump, whom he knows has no loyalty to him or anybody else who served in the administration, Bolton is a loose cannon. And it was interesting, if you happen to catch up with CN Live, Consortium News live program that I appeared on last week talking about impeachment, I found it amusing because I mentioned Bolton, and Joe Laria, editor-in-chief of Consortium News, just lowered the boom on Bolton and said, look, this is a guy who has no credibility. And then my pal Joe turned around and kind of said that Rudy Giuliani has some shreds of credibility left. I'll leave you to be the referee on that one. Now, yesterday I mentioned that the Ruski buddies of Rudy Giuliani, they are American citizens, Lev Parnas and Igor, what's his name? What is Igor's last name? Igor Fruman. They appeared in court, pled not guilty to the campaign finance violations. And here is the wrinkle. A lawyer for Lev Parnas, Ed McMahon, not the Johnny Carson sidekick. Well, he's got a junior. Maybe he's old Ed McMahon's son. Anyway, he told the judge in the case that there is a potential for the White House to invoke executive privilege stemming from the fact that Lev Parnas paid Rudy Giuliani $500,000 to serve as his lawyer at the same time that Giuliani was working as Trump's lawyer, we're told, as a volunteer. Now, the claim of executive privilege has been tossed around by this administration casually and broadly, but it has never, in my knowledge, been officially declared. Now, I find it to be totally preposterous that Lev Parnas, no matter what his relationship is with Rudy Giuliani, has some two-hop executive privilege. I don't even think Giuliani could claim it because he's not an actual employee of the White House, the government. He doesn't have any government status. He's just a friend of Trump's who is doing all of this because of brotherly love. So I don't know where that's going to go. But it has to cause quivers in the White House. And Trump has to be even more nervous to hear this guy Lev Parnas, who he says, well, I posed for a picture with him, but I've never heard of him. I don't know him. You know, he says that about anybody who threatens his credibility or his legal freedom. At any rate, this is a claim that may have some legs as they attempt to assert it. And we will see further feverish denials from the White House. Never heard of the guy. No, I don't know him. Got a couple examples of yellow journalism for you today related to the Ukraine Gate investigation. Now, the New York Times has a story that is given prominent play on the homepage on their website, and nominally it seems like a nice feature on the brave Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting against Russian-backed separatists along the eastern border of Ukraine with Russia. They're the people who spent all summer waiting for the military aid that Trump was holding up because he was blackmailing Zelensky to investigate Biden, Burisma, and the 2016 black ledger that got Paul Manafort in trouble. So, as you read this and you start to feel the anguish of these soldiers left in the lurch by the American ally that they've been counting on to come to their rescue and to deliver these significant and essential munitions to help them take on the Ruskies. And we don't even know if they're Ruskies because they're not in uniforms. They're just the enemy, right? Well, when you get to page 5 of a 6-page printout of this story, they admit that there is a big catch, and I have never heard this before. The Trump administration provided the missiles. These are anti-tank missiles called TOW, T-O-W, on the condition that they not be used in the war. So Zelensky has been waiting for a shipment of weapons to put in a warehouse that he is not permitted to use in what is considered to be this deadly struggle with Putin. Now, this undermines the whole claim that Trump, and I think he's dirty on this. I think he ran an ugly scam. But the Democrats, pound their chests and puff themselves up and say, he deserted our allies in Syria and now he deserted our allies in Ukraine for his own political gain. Yeah, he's a craven asshole. That's what he does. But I challenge you and I invite you to share with me if you see any other coverage of this particular point, that the missiles the United States has sent to Ukraine are there just as museum pieces. Here's a former chief settlement negotiator, Irina Herashchenko. She said, "They are not to be on the front line. Their precise deployment positions are kept secret." So that's yellow journalism. The lead of this story is that the Ukrainian forces that depend on the United States are not allowed to use the weapons that we claim we're sending them to even up the struggle, to level the playing field on this battleground. It's just bizarre. Next up, a yellowish piece of journalism from the New York Times under the byline of old hand Stephen Erlanger. Trump's recent actions in Syria and Ukraine have upset our European allies. There's agreement that Trump has destabilized Europe's near neighborhood in a major, even fundamental way that requires a unified response. He references Syria forsaking the Kurds and the message that sent to Europeans as jihadists from their nations may come back. Here comes the Putin ad. Both episodes benefited Vladimir V. Putin of Russia, working to destabilize European democracies. But then the article goes on to admit that the Europeans are already so fractured. And it undermines the claim that Trump's blunders, and he has made blunders. I agree with the thrust of his decision in Syria, but the bungled way that he's carried it out cannot be excused. But this article ends up showing you that there are 27 different views in the European Union. And we have left people like Macron of France very angry. He was bitter about Trump's unilateral move in Syria. Quote, "I understood that we were together in NATO, that the U.S. and Turkey were in NATO, and I found out via a tweet that the U.S. had decided to withdraw their troops." Now, I agree that that's outrageous. But it's pretty clear that the Europeans are in no position to present any unified response to Trump's moves. Yet the New York Times uses this to try to put a ring around Trump's neck. Again, I am not defending Trump. I am criticizing the biased coverage. And it is topped off by Bret Stephens, who's an op-ed columnist at the Times, a former editor of the Jerusalem Post, who offers a wishful column which I find perverse with reverse logic. And he is hoping that the trend that I have been so scornful of, that Democrats are now flipping with Republicans. They're the pro-war team. They're the neocons who want to stay in Syria. And he's hoping that this continues, and he considers it a good thing. If the argument, he says, that the Kurds stood by us, depended on us, and helped us wage a difficult war, well, so did many others, like the Montagnards in Vietnam. If the argument is that our retreat from Syria creates the conditions for a humanitarian disaster, one must ask, where was that humanitarian concern when much of the left was agitating for immediate U.S. withdrawal from Iraq as a terrorist and sectarian violence exploded in 2005 and 2006? If the argument is that we're vacating territories in which terrorists are sure to flourish, why are major Democratic presidential candidates uniformly in favor of withdrawing from Afghanistan? So Stephens, who supports endless imperial wars by the United States, and is part of the Zionist wing that promotes U.S. backing of the aggressive foreign policy of Israel. He celebrates this shift of the Democratic Party into the endless war party. And I find that ugly and dispiriting. Caitlin Johnstone has done it again. She is such a treasure, based in Australia. She is such a brilliant critic, in particular of American foreign policy and lies that we promote. And she's back on the case with an update on critiques of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and its investigation of the alleged chemical attack in Douma, Syria, on the 7th of April in 2018. Now, I've been sharply critical of this. We have never seen substantial evidence that a chemical agent like sarin was released there. And Johnstone goes through some of her own previous coverage, a prediction by an independent who was running for Congress named Steve Cox, who noted that when Trump suggested that he would pull troops out of Syria in early April of 2018, that he wrote on Twitter, "If after this announcement we end up with headlines proclaiming another gas attack by Assad against his own people, do not believe it. He may be a tyrant, but he's not an idiot. The U.S. leaving his country is good for him, and a gas attack prevents the U.S. exit." So we have seen that the OPCW produced a report that was not credible. And now an investigation of that investigation by the Courage Foundation, which includes members like Richard Falk, who I've interviewed. He's a man who was a UN human rights advocate for many years. Also, the editor of WikiLeaks, Kristen Hrafsson, who produced documents that show the internal wrangling inside the organization, OPCW. And there are some detailed quotes here. I don't have time, and you don't have the attention span for me to just read it to you verbatim. But I've put up a link to Caitlin Johnstone's very important piece, and I encourage you to check it out. You'll find the link in the show file for this podcast at peterbcollins.com. And while you're there, if you're not currently a subscriber, why don't you fix that? Judy Holloway gives me $5 a month. Carla Mahoney does. Ben Brotman and Polina Vasilev. I'd like you to join their ranks. While you're at my site, click on the menu tab, click on Become a Subscriber. You'll hit the sign-up page, and it's easy to choose the level of support that's comfortable for you. And should you like to avoid PayPal, and I understand, all you have to do is put it in the U.S. mail. I'm at Box 150, 660, San Rafael, California, zip code 94915. Well, I'm scratching my bald head. Got up this morning and was going through Facebook a little bit, and one of my friends who is a staunch Biden supporter said there's this new poll, and he declared, "We've got it." Well, it's very confusing. CNN released a poll yesterday that shows Biden 15 percentage points ahead of Elizabeth Warren. But a Quinnipiac poll that came out today, and these are both national polls, shows Warren as the front runner, 7 points ahead of Biden. Bernie Sanders is described as finishing a strong third in both polls, suggesting that his standing hasn't been diminished. So we don't know why these polls are different. You can get into the metrics and mechanics of the poll, the sampling, the question that was asked. But still, this shows that most Democrats haven't made up their minds. 53% say they have a second candidate in mind, and they could change their mind before the primaries start up in February. So the guy who runs the Quinnipiac poll, Doug Schwartz, said, "It makes me think that voters aren't settled. They're still shopping for a candidate." And the gap there in the Quinnipiac is Warren at 28 and Biden at 21. And once again, the New York Times, while it describes Sanders as a strong third, it doesn't bother to give you the numbers. And this is evidence of the way that they try to marginalize him and write him out of the story whenever they can. Now, I saw this report today, and I said, didn't Tim Ryan already drop out of the presidential race? And no, that was Seth Moulton. So Tim Ryan, the conservative congressman from Ohio, who did make a strong case for jobs and economic development, has bailed out of the race. And we also have the sad case of Joe Sestak. Now, I have a soft spot for Joe. He was a congressman from Pennsylvania, ran twice for Senate, and I really like him. He's much more moderate than I am, and in some ways he's off base on key issues from my point of view. But still, I like Joe Sestak. He's solid, he's honest, and he is currently completing a trek on foot across the state of New Hampshire. And Britain's The Guardian sent a reporter to shadow him. And it was a little embarrassing because Joe showed up at a public library for a meeting with voters, and only one person showed up. Then the polls came out, and the ones that I just cited, the CNN poll and the Quinnipiac, both show zero support for Joe Sestak. Now, he got in the race late. He doesn't have much money, but he's head and shoulders above Amy Klobuchar, Michael Bennet, the senator from Colorado. Anyway, I can't explain why he's getting absolutely no traction. As you know, Trump hates the media, fake news. New York Times and Washington Post are his lead nemeses. And today, he announced an order to all government agencies to cancel their subscriptions to both of those newspapers. Yeah, that'll fix it, Donald. Keep government employees from reading the paper. That's really going to fix it. In Beirut, Lebanon, it has been a week now, as nearly 1 million people are reported in the streets every day. And it's fair to say that it's a faction-ridden country where the government has served the interests of the 1%. Meanwhile, the garbage isn't being picked up, the streets are in shambles, and people have had enough. And so they are now demanding a revolution. They want a new government and a new system of government. And the New York Times sent a reporter into the crowd, and at least what she picked up anecdotally is that the people there, despite the factions that have divided Lebanon over the years, are now united. And so she interviewed 2 women who were there, and they both were asked for their affiliations. And they said, no, don't publish which sect we are from. We don't believe in that. We're all Lebanese. On the streets, we are not Shiite or Sunni or Christians. We are Lebanese. The protesters say they're finished with their leaders, many of them former Civil War-era warlords. Yes, there's been a civil war there since 1975, who ruled the country like a series of personal fiefs to be plundered, dispensing the spoils to loyal followers. And studies show the richest 3,000 people in the country, including many of the politicians, earn 10% of the national income, and the rest are left to fight over the crumbs. Boris Johnson, in his latest maneuver, is announcing that he wants to set an election for Prime Minister and Parliament on December 12th. Now, as you know, Johnson and his predecessor, Theresa May, were not elected by a national vote. They were appointed by the Conservative Party. So because of the moves of Parliament that have led to an extension of the time to finalize a Brexit agreement, the jockeying is going on, but it is important to note that the Labour Party controls the call for a vote. He needs a majority in Parliament. Johnson does. He doesn't have that, and so it will require Labour votes to call this election. And the strategy of the Labour Party, is unknown to me. Jill Stein has a great op-ed, her commentary responding to Hillary Clinton's Russia smears. It's published in The Guardian today. And before I quote a couple of items from it, I want to note that I've been watching MSNBC carefully the last few nights, and I have seen zero mention, not even a word, of Hillary Clinton's casual smears of Tulsi Gabbard and Jill Stein. Is there a blackout at MSDNC? Are they protecting Hillary? Is that what they think? Or are they shunning Tulsi Gabbard and her anti-war message that conflicts with the neocon agenda at MSNBC that would be approved by Bret Stephens of the New York Times? Anyway, here's an opening line from Jill Stein. Like her attack on Tulsi Gabbard, Hillary Clinton's accusation that I, Jill Stein, am a Russian asset is a ludicrous, unhinged conspiracy theory with no basis in fact. It's an attempt to deflect attention from the role of Clinton's campaign in her own defeat. This desperate blame game is not an encouraging sign that the Democratic Party will muster a winning strategy to oust the disastrous Trump administration next year. Equally alarming, Clinton has fueled a new era of McCarthyism, a toxic brew of warmongering, political repression, and censorship now poisoning our public discourse. By continuing to blame everyone else for their loss, the Clinton camp is suppressing serious reflection on the problems with their own campaign, ranging from the Pied Piper strategy of urging media allies to elevate Donald Trump to front-runner status to the sabotage of Bernie Sanders by Clinton surrogates at the DNC. And the deflection strategy also seeks to cover over a key factor in Clinton's loss: her record of serving Wall Street, promoting corporate trade deals that hurt working people, and supporting endless war and regime change disasters. So there's more, and there's a link. Grab it and read it at your convenience. So by most accounts, Mark Zuckerberg did not win any new friends on Capitol Hill yesterday. He was grilled over this new currency scheme, an online virtual cryptocurrency called Libra. And I've kind of avoided covering that because it's just a pipe dream on his part right now. I don't consider it to be a serious initiative. And when it gets there, maybe we'll dive into it. But anyway, the exchange with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was quite a grilling. She said, would I be able to run ads on Facebook targeting Republicans in primaries saying that they voted for the Green New Deal? Congresswoman, I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. I think probably, Zuck said. So you don't know if I'll be able to do that? I think probably. Do you see a potential problem here? And he had no answer. His non-answers, his deflections, are quite notable. Now, Vanita Gupta, who's a former Facebook executive, now CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, says the company and Mark do not seem to understand what voter suppression looks like in 2019. And she doesn't go full-on Russiagate. She says you don't have to look further than the 2016 election to show how foreign actors use these very same tactics that domestic actors have used for centuries in this country that undermine participation of voters of color. Well, I don't agree with her characterization of Russia's impact in 2016, but you know that. Then Judd Legum, who used to be over at the Center for American Progress, is quoted as saying, he can't be straightforward because the policy is inherently inconsistent. He says Facebook will police voter suppression but not misinformation. But one of the most effective ways to suppress votes is to push misinformation. Zuckerberg was also attacked by a Democratic Congressman, Sean Casten, who asked him if a member of the American Nazi Party ran for office, could they buy an ad that included hate speech otherwise prohibited? Congressman, I think that depends on a bunch of specifics that I'm not familiar with and can't answer to. So those are the kind of dodges that he was serving up. And Ocasio-Cortez did a great job of pressing him about when he learned about the way Cambridge Analytica was abusing the data that they had obtained from Facebook. And he dodged that question. And this has been an open question that Facebook has been ducking for a long time. She pressed him. Around the time the news became public is when Zuckerberg said he learned of it. Then she asked if anybody on the leadership team knew about the firm before the report was published in 2015. I believe some folks were tracking it internally, Zuckerberg said. I do think I was aware of Cambridge Analytica as an entity, but I don't know if I was tracking how they were using Facebook specifically. And AOC went on to ask him about the policy of exempting the political ads, which we talked about a moment ago. Kara Swisher weighs in at the New York Times. She's their technology opinion writer. She compares the congressional testimony to Zuckerberg's speech at Georgetown last week. And she uses what I think is a weak argument. She trots out Bernice King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr., who tweeted after Zuck quoted her in his Georgetown speech, "I heard Zuck's free expression speech in which he referenced my father. I'd like to help Facebook better understand the challenges that MLK faced from disinformation campaigns launched by politicians." Now, you can argue this because it's fair to say that there was a disinformation campaign about Martin Luther King before he was assassinated. But it was all wrapped up in J. Edgar Hoover's FBI domestic COINTELPRO program. And so to blame the media or just individual politicians, I think, is a very weak argument. This is shocking. Instead of working on any kind of consensus gun legislation measures, Republicans in the Senate are now proposing massive total surveillance of every student in the United States to help prevent mass shootings. They want to set up programs that can scan everything that students write in school emails, chats, shared documents, and their social media. They say that this would enable us to identify bad actors before they conduct their bad acts. It's just stupid. And it violates many elements of our laws and the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, but I guess students don't matter. Finally today, Jason Leopold has another great story based on a Freedom of Information Act disclosure. And it reminds me of the way the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, this was pre-COINTELPRO, early 60s, did a nationwide investigation to try to track down the actual lyrics in the song Louie Louie because they thought it was subversive. This time it's the Secret Service who went to interview Eminem after he released an LP called Revival, which included what they found to be threatening lyrics aimed at Donald Trump and his daughter Ivanka. And Leopold, with the release of these documents, can now confirm that about a month after Revival was released, the Secret Service reported that a concerned citizen reported Marshall Mathers, that's the legal name of Eminem, that some of the tunes contained inappropriate comments. Well, it turns out the concerned citizen was a TMZ reporter who was trying to get a comment from the Secret Service, which turned it into a complaint. Then they went to interview Eminem, Marshall Mathers. They started reciting the lyrics of his rap. And Leopold reports that Eminem started rapping along with the Secret Service agents. And we can just imagine that they were as white as Eminem, but not as skilled in music and rhyme. Your government at work, your tax dollars being spent so wisely. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it everywhere, including with Eminem. You'll find it on YouTube. And I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.